Hi, everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the global EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to those loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you help us please get the word out about this podcast to other enthusiasts, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino-Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I read a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.substack.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. A summertime Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. Good morning. This is Lei Xing, co-host, former chief editor of China Auto Review. And this is episode number 174. So we're into August. We just saw the July numbers. Some headlines on BYD, Tesla, Autopilot, FSD, the legacy OEMs, especially the European ones, feeling the pain in Q2, the first half for that matter. Where do you want to begin?
Let's start with the July sales.
July sales. So, all right. So some observations from my side.
Let me qualify this by saying that July is still middle of summer, so it's not going to be as action-packed as the September, October, November timeframe, but it's an indicator of general strength and weakness of the automotive market in China.
Well, first of all, we had that beef from several, let's say, frenemies.
Frenemies. Yes, you and I said at the same time, right?
Like frenemies of Li Auto, not happy about them pushing that weekly sales data that went viral for a few days, I think. And then now every first of the month is a mass scramble itself for pushing out these monthly sales numbers.
12:01 a.m. local time.
Yeah, so I mean, it starts about noon if you're in China, right? It continues all the way into the night when these numbers are pushed out.
And the foreign legacies do not participate in this,
except Volkswagen and GM, I guess.
Begrudgingly, I think. Begrudgingly.
Yeah. Some observations first. I think it's getting increasingly difficult to have, let's say, meaningful and step changes if we're talking about records. And we did have some records in July of all months. But those records, let's say for BYD, is a matter of selling 340,001 unit in July versus 340,000 unit in June, right? So it wasn't significant, but nevertheless, records. Li Auto was still able to get a record despite all the brouhaha. And
I want to say this, Lei. Let me say, and you tell me if there are any exceptions to this statement that I'm about to make. Any, let's say, month-to-month flat sales or growth month-to-month, there's likely an underlying price discount or some other form of non-price discount incentive that is allowing them to maintain sales. So, for instance, a BYD, they reduced the price of the Fangcheng Bao 5 by 17%.
Which, I think
the Fangcheng Bao is not a big runner for them, but it does automatically put the Bao 5 in the consideration of Chinese consumers that are looking at X3s, X5s, and Mercedes SUVs. And so this really is one of the biggest reasons why the foreign automakers are struggling.
Yeah, we'll get back to BYD on that point a little bit later on. But number 3, I was going to say Xiaomi is climbing up the ladder pretty fast and surpassing quite a few, including XPeng, our good, we love XPeng, right? We love the G9, but XPeng is coming up on its 10-year anniversary, and its monthly sales have only got to this point at least they maintain that 10,000 unit level. But I feel like it's almost like putting salt on the wound that you have this 3-year-old, 3.5-year-old new kid on the block, just right. They said it was over 10,000 units, but based on that weekly data that Li Auto shared, it's about 14,000 units for the first 4 weeks of July. So it's painful if you're Xpeng. See, I've been around for 10 years, and this new kid just all of a sudden with one model is beating us. I ain't okay with that, right?
And
But
we can also maybe put Neo a little bit in that same bucket where they've been around for a long time, have a lot of products, and you and I have driven in a number of Neos, have driven in a number of Xpengs. We like them. They're not bad, but they just can't get over the hump.
and getting over that hump is exactly why I tweeted that that's the two most anticipated model launches this month and next month is in fact key models for both of these companies, the Mono
Right.
MO3 and the Envo L60, which the anticipation and expectation is they will add significant volumes because of the price segment they're playing in and lofty expectations.
But the notable thing to me, Lei, is that they couldn't do it with vehicles with the Xpeng brand and the Neo brand.
Well, yeah, I mean, Xpeng, on the one hand, the P5 flopped, the G9 kind of flopped,
Big time.
the
Big
the
time.
the G6
P5 flop big time. So
the G6 kind of wasn't as, let's just say it also flopped. What the heck? And now
well, everything has been lukewarm for a few weeks, and then you don't hear about it.
yeah, and then all Neo on the other hand, I think they've done a good job of tweaking that BAS model and launching this next generation of models into the market as that battery swapping proliferates. I think actually 20,000 a month, if it can maintain that, I think that's my expectation also. At least 20,000 a month. It's a win, right? But for Xbone, relatively 10,000 a month is a F. I would grade it a F. Flunked. Right.
And a reminder to the listeners, on a base of likely 26 million units total this year in China being sold, and likely about 10 or let's say 11 million units, 12 million units, maybe on the NEV side, 10,000 a month. So 120,000 on a base of 13 million, 11 million, 12 million NEVs.
And I think, we saw the Expo AI Smart Tech press conference that they're trying to continue to lead in that NOA game. But part of the reason why I think their sales haven't gotten the momentum is because others are catching up, right? Li Auto, they're catching up, right, on that NOA game. Neo's pushing out the NLP Plus.
Well, Huawei,
Ito, yeah, I mean,
effectively
Ito,
sucking all the air out of the room.
I mean, they're selling about 15,000 units of the M9 a month, I think, based on what I saw. That's a 500,000 MB vehicle. That's a lot. And two other names, I think, Leap Motor and Neta, you're seeing that export now starting increasingly play an important role in their sales. Leap Motor, right, just exported the C10 and the TO3 to, as part of the Stellantis.
There's a nice picture on the Chinese internet that showed the vehicles in the big boat.
And Neta now, a significant portion of their sales, I think, will be geared toward export markets.
I think they're going to end up being an iWays.
iWays, yeah, exactly.
Where it's almost export only.
And back to BYD about that Fangcheng Bao, it wasn't well received, at least from the previous owners, right?
Right.
Because that's a huge price cut, 50,000 RMB, and I don't think there's any retroactive compensation. And I think it's one of maybe the weaker spots that we talk about BYD because of this multi-brand strategy that now it could be biting themselves back.
Well, we pointed to this, right, Lei? We pointed to, number one, it's multi-brand. Number two, it's a premium brand. So the characteristics of the Chinese consumer on the premium side, a lot different than the mass market, where the mass market side, just brutally competitive. But on the premium side, So mass market, they're looking for value. On the premium side, they are looking for differentiation. They're looking for something that is tech forward. And so when you cut price by 20%, you're not going to make a lot of people very happy. So,
and because of their core brand BYD, I think that's the exact reason that pricing of that vertical integration competitiveness that they got the 100,000 unit deal with Uber. And we can talk a little bit about that, which the others don't have the benefit of. Think about NIO getting 100,000 units. Whoever gets 100,000 units, it's significant.
But what's important to note, Lei, is that we just point right back to the Tesla and Hertz partnership that unraveled fabulously.
I was going to the same point. I don't know whatever happened to the 100,000 unit between BYD and Sixt. I don't think that was a big success. I don't think anybody talks about it anymore. But
for our American listeners, Sixt is effectively Germany's Hertz.
Hertz, yeah.
Or Europe's Hertz.
But I think what's different this time is rather to have these ride-hail people who are on the platform, who are drivers, get incentivized on getting to these financing, leasing, to be able to have these BYDs and operate them and make a living, make money, right? That was the point, I think. At the same time, for the users, kind of to see these experience the BYDs.
And what's another point to make about the Uber BYD partnership is that we'd been contacted in the past about helping Uber recruit some Chinese EV brands, because Uber has pledged that they'll be carbon neutral, I think, as a company by 2030, I want to say, or I think it's 2030. I'll check that. And in order for that to happen, they'll need a lot of clean energy vehicles. Now, this was 3 or 4 years ago. So they've been kicking around this discussion for quite some time. It didn't happen overnight. And for whatever reason, it was the right timing. BYD and these other Chinese EV makers 3 or 4 years ago didn't have the channels that they do now into Europe and into LATAM. So maybe that's also partially why this was the right time to make this announcement.
And also, the fine print, it's interesting to point out, as comparing to the Chinese press release and the Uber press release, there are some discrepancies, I tell you. I don't know why that is. In the Uber press release...
Lost in translation.
Yeah, there's Canada. But in the Chinese press release, there's no mention of Canada. And Canada, because for another reason, we'll talk about Canada. And then about the autonomous capable vehicles to be deployed, that wasn't mentioned in the Chinese press release. So
to me, that's a throwaway statement.
Yeah,
I don't know if it matters
is that, right?
now.
Is it the Tesla robotaxi or is it something else? Right, we don't know.
Because honestly, the last thing I want is my Uber driver to be testing his level 2+ system when me and my family are in their car. That's the last thing I want.
Yeah. And then Canada, for the reason because there are reports that their BYDs are going to launch in Canada, our neighbor.
With the dark cloud of Canada already rumored to be evaluating tariffs. Now, we always have to remember, the United States off limits for the time being for China EV Inc. So the pressure increases to ship volume somewhere else into North America, because now that Europe has established this tariff, the UK is evaluating whether or not to put some tariffs up. But, in North America, the largest passenger vehicle market outside of China, it's an important distribution channel for all the automakers. And so, I joked around that BYD is continuing to move aggressively despite X, Y, and Z happening. And so when we look at the rumor about Canada, it just points to the fact that eventually they're going to make it to the United States, regardless of what happens with the tariffs.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome to another season of Anything But Law, where we talk about anything but law. It's literally in the name. This season, we continue to dive into the minds of exceptional people From entrepreneurs and business leaders to gold medal winning Olympians and thought leaders, we bring you inspiring stories and valuable insights from those who have truly made a mark in their fields. In each episode, we explore the success mindset, the art of overcoming adversity, and the powerful lessons learned from failures that have launched extraordinary success. Our guests share their journeys, challenges, and the pivotal moments that have defined their paths to greatness.
Yeah, exactly. Matter of time. When when BYD is in fact all over America, as I say.
Oh my god.
I mean, you can buy a BYD in Canada and drive it to the US, no problem, right? That shouldn't be a problem, should it?
Well, and I'd summarized in a LinkedIn post. So over 80 countries currently. They're going to manufacture in 7, and they're going to get to close to 4 million units. They are the clean energy version of Toyota. And if Toyota gets to 10.5 million, and we can talk about Toyota in a second, but they're what Tesla wants to be. BYD is what Tesla wants to be. And biggest asset that they have is that they can play in the PHEV and the BEV spaces seamlessly. They're not.
Yeah.
It's not going to take them 18 months to roll out a PHEV. It's not going to take them 18 months to roll out a BEV. Got them. They got them.
Yeah, and going back to the sales a little bit, if you look at the breakdown of July sales for BYD, PHEV accounted for a significant more portion of the sales of the 340,000. So, I mean, that's proving that some of the recent model launches and price movements on the DMI models really is taking market share away from the ICEs, pure ICEVs, and the PHEVs have a lot to do with it instead of the BEVs.
This also makes you wonder, Lei, for the EU, do they have an advocate in the government that explicitly excluded PHEVs from the tariffs? Because
that's what it is right now.
Yeah, they're just going to shove.
Yeah.
They're just going to shove PHEVs into Europe, man.
Yeah. So yeah, and then having said that, I think if you look at the 100,000 unit Uber, if you're looking at exporting to Canada, these recent price cut on the Fangcheng Bao, I mean, all of these are tactics, solutions, really because at the back of your mind, we have this huge capacity. Whatever the sales target this year is 3.6 million, 4 million units, produce, export, and thankfully Uber will help alleviate some of that pressure, hopefully, if it materializes to the full extent.
But 100,000, I would imagine, is over a few years. So
yeah, it's not in one shot exactly. So
I don't really see it moving the needle that much. The other thing, Lei, about the Fangcheng Bao price cut specifically is that just last week we talked about the ABB waving the white flag saying no mas. So Fangcheng Bao saw that and was like, okay, we're going to take more share from them. And that's one of the reasons, I'm certain, that's one of the reasons they reduced price by 17%.
Well, also part of it is Fangcheng Bao. I mean, if you've seen the sales numbers, right? It's in the thousands.
Oh, yeah.
Low thousands a month.
And we always have to remember, Lei, that when Fangcheng Bao is manufacturing, they need to give likely at least 90, maybe 180 days worth of a forecast to their suppliers. And if they're not hitting the manufacturing targets, they're either forced to take on inventory from a component standpoint, or they're pushing it out, putting even more pressure on suppliers to hold the inventory, which when we know this, Lei, suppliers don't have a ton of margin, not at the OEM level. And so anytime there's a delay or the master production schedule gets slowed down, the tier 1 suppliers are under a lot of stress because their cash flow is turned off. And so we're going to see not only the OEMs, but it's going to reverberate throughout the supply chain. And we'll see it more towards the end of this year.
Yeah, and speaking of suppliers, right, part of the reason is because of that investment into the electrification, but that progress has slowed down. And so one prime example is ZF is letting 11,000 to 14,000 employees go in Germany alone over the next how many years. That was one of the news that came out, and then all the German automakers announced their results yesterday and the day before, right? And we saw Volkswagen. I think you tweeted about that 25% reduction in capacity in was it Germany or in Europe?
In Germany.
Germany, probably, yeah. So all ABBs, right? They announced their results and all in their sales, EBIT, net profit, all down in Q2. Their sales in China were down year on year. I think BMW was flat. It was like 0.2% growth, but at the expense of these deep discounting, not adding sales. And they said no mas.
It's just hurting their brand. It's just hurting their brand.
Yeah. And at least 30%, right? If not a third of their sales come out of China, right?
And I can tell you exactly what's happening in management meetings in Germany at ABB. They're looking at the product roadmap for a lot of these companies. They're looking at the current features for some of these EVs out on the road in China. And they're like, holy cow, how can we catch up to this? Because they're at least 18 months ahead from a technology roadmap standpoint within the vehicle. And they're flummoxed. I just don't know because, again, they lead. And again, I should say they're better now than they were 3 or 4 years ago, but they're still leading with hardware, okay? And in China, I don't know anyone, Lei, and you talked to your friends when you were there last month. Nobody talks about range. Nobody talks about the traditional stuff that Europeans and Americans worry about. Everybody talks about the connectivity. Everybody talks about how innovative everything is in the Chinese vehicles. And so the things that are concerning to Europeans and Americans, that's not the case in China. And so the product planners are looking at this huge difference between what's demanded from a feature standpoint in China versus the rest of the world. And it's got to make them pull their hair out.
Yeah. At least Volkswagen Group has a plan, a roadmap. Whether they be success is another question. But
come on, man. See, this is where you are so nice. You're too nice.
No. I'm just saying relatively to other ones who are still in the dark, Volkswagen at least is trying.
The other thing too now, Lei, is so what's going on with Cariad? Are they just going to completely blow it up? Because they are leaning into Rivian from an architecture standpoint. They're leaning into XPeng from an architecture standpoint. So that Rivian team, even the China team, loses a ton of significance, loses a ton of leverage from an internal politics standpoint.
Yeah, it sounds as if the Rivian joint venture on the architecture seems to be overtaking, kind of overshadowing Cariad for sure. And their future, I mean, the MEB Plus, the SSP, I mean, they're all globally going to come out of the Rivian partnership.
And think of it this way, Lei. Volkswagen Group has, on paper, committed $5 billion over several years with an initial $1 billion into Rivian and a joint venture from a technology licensing standpoint. Rivian, I haven't seen the latest valuation, but it can't be worth more than, $15-20 billion, right? So if you're already committing 5, does this mean in the future, if things go really well in the next 18-24 months, there's a potential acquisition? Because when you think about it, and this is where I give Tavares a lot of credit. This week or late last week, he said, we're going to reconcile our brand strategy. And there's too many. So poor performing brands are going to get left out. So Stellantis is going to do what GM did several years ago with Oldsmobile, Hummer, Pontiac. There's just way too many brands.
So either axe them or sell them. I don't know. I think there's news that Maserati was being, considered to be sold or something. I don't know.
And remember what I said a long, long time ago, Lei, where I said an Apple and Google have 150 billion, Amazon have $100 billion in the bank, and a brand that's super weak but has manufacturing in several regions. There could be a technology company that wants to get into the automotive space, and that would be a way to do that. They could buy a brand for less than $2 billion. So they could gut the management team, keep the manufacturing, keep the assets, and then go with that. So I don't think that scenario is very far-fetched, to be quite frank.
Yeah. So I know you talked about the recent Wall Street Journal, that video on the Tesla findings, autopilot. I just want to say at the end of that video, what Missy Cummings said was very jarring. So she said having the car do the most of the driving and requiring you to pay attention. I don't think this is going to be the long-term tech that we will keep in the cars. I hear that. I'm saying, well, that's exactly what Expo is trying to do. Point to point autonomy, but with you paying attention. So what the heck?
I almost feel that, and so for those that are wondering what Lei is referring to, is in my newsletter this week.
Yeah, you talked
I
about.
dedicated about 80% of the newsletter to my thoughts, and I did a very, very oversimplified autonomous vehicle 101. And that's because Wall Street Journal this week had an expose, a video investigation about Tesla's, and this is where it's not clear whether it's autopilot or FSD. There's not a lot of transparency in the United States on the accidents caused by Tesla vehicles and whether or not autopilot is activated, FSD is activated. But there have been hundreds, maybe thousands of accidents with dozens of fatalities. Now, NHTSA, which is the Transportation Safety Administration, they're investigating, but it's disconcerting. You know, I don't know how you feel, Lei, but watching that video, I just don't like that we are beta testers for an electric vehicle company. And this is where you and I have the wherewithal, right? Because we know that would never happen in China, ever.
Well, I mean, the difference to me, I know you kind of mentioned about the autopilot and FSD. The difference to me, a good analogy would be autopilot to me would be the highway XNGP, whereas the FSD is the point to point everywhere XNGP. That's my kind of understanding. And then these accidents, well, the Tesla stands will say, well, the driver is responsible. If autopilot or FSD is on, if not paying attention, then it's an L2 plus system, then the driver's at fault, right? And you and I, when we drove that Expo, we made it a point that we have to pay attention at all times. But it still alleviated that driving tension and fatigue, right? It helps significantly, I think. But
on the highway.
No, I mean on some of the urban elevated, transit ways as well, but definitely not in the local, at least not yet. At least not as what they're painted it to be, right? That it's point to point that you don't have to worry about anything. You're still nervous, right? We're still not past that point.
You know what's weird too, Lei? As more and more level 2 plus robotaxis enter the road, the habits of these cars aren't going to be the same as people. So the algorithm's going to have to get updated and retrained again as more and more intelligent driving systems enter the road or, hit the roads.
So I was reading about this article in Chinese, which is about an interview with the head of autonomous driving, Li Auto, Lang Xianpeng. I think their team went to the US several times to test out the FSD, and their comment was that version 12 was really, really close, at least in the US environment and on the West Coast, really close to a human kind of what a human would do driving the vehicle. That was their comment. And also they noticed notable difference testing it out on the East Coast versus the West Coast, where I think West Coast, there are probably more data. They talk a little bit about that. So, I mean, in the US, if we talk about that point to point that the Expo is trying to achieve, Tesla is definitely outright in the lead. But in China, it's up in the air. It's, Expo says they have the lead, but it's probably razor thin at this point.
Well, there's a lot of bravado on the Chinese side, because if you look at some of the media reports, Huawei says they're better than everybody. And so unless you're in these vehicles testing them out, but regularly, testing them out. Once they have updates, then it's really, really tough to pinpoint who's in the lead, because I think it changes because the Chinese autonomous intelligent driving space is so dynamic.
And then, next, some of the OTAs being pushed out by Xpeng later this year is the ability to go through the ETC lanes, right? I talked about that going through the robotaxi. And I'm like, okay, that's essentially a robotaxi, but a level 2 robotaxi, because the car is driving with you paying attention, going through the ETC lanes by itself, going through the parking turnstiles. You can do it by itself. I mean, you still have to scan and pay, but once that thing lifts up, it'll go, right? This is not possible now, but I mean, it's really getting blurred, ever more blurred, of a level 2 versus a level 4.
Well, level 2 intelligent driving on an OEM vehicle versus a robotaxi.
Yeah.
In the United States, there's still a huge chasm, a huge gap between level 2, because let's think about this, Lei. GM has Super Cruise. I don't even know what the other ones are called, man.
Ford has a Blue Cruise.
Blue Cruise, yes. Tesla obviously has autopilot and FSD. Lucid's not great, so let's not even count that for now. Mercedes has their own, which I think in Nevada and certain parts of California, they can go level 3.
Very limited conditions only. Yeah.
And I don't really know. What's Hyundai's called? Do you know?
Level 2. They don't even have a kind of a name like a XNGP or FSD. They just
So just tells you. And we're only talking about level 2 plus intelligent driving. We can name 5 off the top of our head in China, but I can't tell you more than 3. And they're not super mature. They're not being marketed very aggressively. I think GM probably markets, if we're not talking about Tesla, GM probably markets Super Cruise because you see it in commercials now. But there's not this huge competition between all these different competitors that you're seeing in China.
Yeah, I mean the 5, basically the 3, Weixiaoli, each of them have their own. They're trying to compete.
And they're all very mature.
Yeah, GUA has the vision only, the only vision only, I think, so far in China. Huawei has the NCA, right? There's 5 right there.
and then Deep Route is also looking to get into the OEM space. QCraft is looking to get into the OEM space. And so, to your point about being blurred, the lines being blurred.
And here's the point. I'm thinking, okay, so by the end of this year, by the early next year, Xpeng achieves point-to-point XNGP anywhere, anytime. What's after that? Where do you go from there? Do you stop, right? What's the next step?
Then you dial in the business model, the revenue model, the profit model.
Then its next step is the robotaxis, which I think He Xiaopeng kind of mentioned that they're planning to launch that G9 robotaxi, right? Maybe within a matter of months.
And the other thing, and I think you would agree with me, is that as the Chinese OEMs try to pull in level 2, level 3 intelligent driving, robotaxi, WeRide, Pony, IPO, the Chinese government is in the background saying, okay, within the next 5 to 7 years, if things go well with these companies, there could be hundreds of thousands of drivers being displaced. So what do we do?
And this is where I think Li Bian was rather, what's the word I was looking for? Politically correct when he answered a question at the Neo-In event that it doesn't make sense to do robotaxis, because one of the reasons he said was, I'm not going to replace the drivers. I think he was being a little bit politically correct. It's just, I mean, I don't think he was a fan of it to begin with. I think he's always prided on this technology, the lifestyle, right, of making their users' lifestyle better. So many years ago when I talked to him, he's like, well, when you buy a car, it's like the autonomous driving is providing you with a chauffeur rather than, he was not into that mobility thing, ride hail. So everything's centered around the user, around the driver. So I think it's not surprising they hear him say it, but for someone like Xpeng, He Xiaopeng, he probably will take an entire different approach. So I think it's normal.
And we have to remember that these are just individual, very influential, but individual opinions. The market's going to dictate where the technology moves and how it's adopted. And in China, at least, the government's going to have a lot of influence on that.
Yeah.
In the United States, it's just different.
The Neo robotaxis from that partnership, Mobileye, weren't they going to go into Detroit? And we've never seen them, right?
Well, yeah, and Motional has an office here too, I believe, and I've not seen any of those here. So it's, yeah.
And then Zeekr kind of doubling down, I think, recently with Mobileye on their super vision, what's it called? That's another approach, right?
And supervision is vision only as well.
Yeah, for now.
The last thing I'll say about this, Lei, is that you and I have been to dozens of cities in China. There are hundreds of thousands of drivers in the United States. Outside of New York, maybe Los Angeles, a couple of cities. There's not a ton of taxi drivers. A lot of Uber drivers, but not a ton of taxi drivers. And so in China, the economics from an employment standpoint are completely different than the U.S. And so this is a huge, I won't say concern, it's a huge challenge, future challenge for the Chinese government. Because let's not only look at taxi drivers, let's look at how automation might affect manufacturing, how AI might affect manufacturing. And so you and I went to the Neo Hefei factory. In the parts that I was allowed to go to, I think you went to a few more areas than I did.
And some of our friends recently, I think they went as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Where I went, final assembly, there's probably some decent manual labor that needs to be done, but most of the areas that I visited, there were not a ton of workers.
Yeah, I mean, in a body shop, in the e-motor factory, is very highly, automated. And then given the fact, I think this new middle class I talked about of people that are now doing Waimai, right, doing food delivery, package delivery. So these are things that need to be considered whenever these new tech have the possibility of replacing the human.
And I saw the statistic, Lei, that maybe can help qualify the differences in wage still between a China, which has wage rates have increased significantly over the last several years. But I think average Shanghai worker now makes about 12,000 RMB a month. So 12,000 RMB is less than 2,000 US dollars.
And it's not that high, to be honest, even by China.
Not for Shanghai. Not for Shanghai.
I mean, not for China as well.
Yeah, for China. But Shanghai is a tier 1 city globally, not just in China. It's global tier 1 city. Yeah. And so if we look at the equivalent of a Topeka, Kansas, or a Lincoln, Nebraska, tier 2, tier 3 city in China, I would think the wage rate is 3/4, maybe in half of that. Yeah. So if people are wondering how Chinese EVs can be cheaper, that's a huge lever right there, just because wage rates aren't as high.
Yeah, the only couple other things I want to mention is, so just last couple of days, there's still some price cuts going on. So Volkswagen launched, I think, cheaper versions of their ID 3 and 4 variants. I think the T1, there's also newer T1, I think it's quite in the low 100,000 RMB range. So that's still going on. And second number I wanted to share was State Council had a press conference today where an official from the MOFCOM indicated that as of today, there have been applications for 450,000 vehicle scraps toward the purchase of new either NEVs or ICEVs from that incentive put in place back in April. So imagine 450,000, that could be net added new vehicle sales. Let's say everything went to NEVs. That's pretty significant because in the first half, I think, let's say roughly 5 million NEVs were sold. That's 10%, right? Almost 10%. And and that'll probably increase because of this recent doubling of the scrap incentive.
And we're just getting out of summer. So I think things to look at, China's general economy. One of the things that I track, I don't know, it's on my feed. I don't know why. I kind of do, but I don't. Rolex prices are going down, and that's largely due to the China market. Luxury
Starbucks sales
goods
were down, I believe.
Yeah, luxury. So LVMH, all the luxury brands are effectively down, and so it's not just an EV thing anymore. And so that's why you're seeing the stimulus, because manufacturing, EV manufacturing, ICE manufacturing is such a huge and important part of the Chinese economy that any sustained downturn could be really, really detrimental. And we already are hearing rumors of foreign brands reconciling some of their capacity in China just because they don't feel very confident that they'll get some of those sales back in the long term. And so they have to again reconcile their manufacturing footprint, because I'll point to the Volkswagen Group thing that we talked about earlier, Lei, how they're looking at reducing by 25%. Now, they're internally, I guarantee you, Lei, they're looking at, okay, we can keep this Chinese factory open, ship from China, and lose a lot of cost and maintain quality levels of vehicle X and Y and Z. Okay. And let me assure you all that these conversations are being had across the board, whether in Detroit, Dearborn, Wolfsburg, Ingolstadt, Stuttgart, in Toyota City. They're all being had just because there's so much capacity in China that the foreign automakers control, but the sales losses on a consistent level is forcing them to think through what their global manufacturing footprint should look like in 5, 7, 10 years. So,
Yeah.
ooh, two things. Okay, you put your Carlos Tavares hat on, Lei. Which brands are you shuttering?
Man, that's hard, right?
No, it's kind of easy, I think. Right? But
Which is rank them by sales. The lowest volume gets cut.
because it's very political, because Stellantis has French brands, they have American brands, they have
Italian brands,
Italian brands,
German brands, Opel.
We're talking entire countries that will go against them, right?
Yeah.
It's to your point, right? If it was that simple, and I'm sure Tavares wants to make it that simple, but because a lot of they're headquartered in France. And so you look at Citroën, you look at Peugeot, they don't perform very well outside of Europe, particularly France. So you would think that that's on the table. And then you look at Fiat, not doing super well in the United States, but then you look at Brazil, Fiat's the number one brand in Brazil. So you peel certain layers of the onion back and then add in Leap Motor, right? They're our partner, but they've effectively could replace one or two brands in the portfolio. It's just super interesting from a strategy standpoint. The other thing that I wanted to get your comments and thoughts on are, it looks like, and ask you if you have read anything on Chinese internet, is Evergrande Auto finally done? Are they going to get pushed into bankruptcy?
I mean, a few of their entities, I think, filed. Was it bankruptcy, or did they get the notice?
Yeah,
few of their subsidiaries. Yeah, I think they're done. Nobody talks about them.
right.
They're one of those.
So by the end of this year, they should be kind of done. And then the other thing was the Faraday Future, how they made zero revenue.
2000
last quarter. God bless them. You and I have friends that still work there, so
they're resilient, man. They're just like they're still planning to launch this China-US bridge strategy, bringing a lower position brand. Really, they're asking for really China EV Inc. to help them. China Supply Inc.
For sure.
China whatever Inc. And
really quickly before we leave, Jeffrey, friend of China EVs and More, He wrote, BYD is making the USA a big sandwich, Canada and Mexico being the bread, and meat with USA being the hot mustard. Get ready for a big bite, BYD. And then his other comment is, Chinese customers demand high quality, innovative products with karaoke and ability to park their car from their brand specific phone while live streaming. And Jeffrey should know, because I'm sure he's drinking through a fire hose over the last couple of weeks because he's moved there. So yeah, Jeffrey, I think you're seeing firsthand what Lei and I saw over several years, and you're seeing kind of the maturity of everything, and the price war just adds a lot of noise because we really don't know, outside of maybe Xiaomi, who are building products that people really demand, if it wasn't for a price cut. I think that's really hard to tell right now. But I don't have anything else, Lei, so maybe we can end it here.
Yeah, sure. I don't have anything else.
Thanks for joining, and we will talk with you all next week. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Same here. Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.